Well, good evening, East Africa, and many thanks for joining us on KTN News on this 22nd day of April 2016. There seems to be a standoff in South Sudan between President Salva Kiir and rebel leader Riek Machar, and tonight we put the issue of South Sudan into perspective. And joining me in studio will be Ambassador Jimmy Dang Makwach, who is in charge of the affairs in the South Sudan embassy in the country, and John Gashie, who is a media and a policy specialist. Do not miss out on that. My name is Akisa Wandera, and this is Bottomline East Africa. Now, South Sudan's government and rebels are wrangling over weaponry and therefore still at odds over the terms for allowing rebel leader Riek Machar to return to the capital. On Wednesday, the two sides said a deal had been reached on Machar's delayed return to form a unity government. However, government negotiator Makwe now says that the government cannot allow the rebels to bring some of the weapons proposed, including rocket-propelled grenade launchers. The chairman of the Joint Monitoring and Evaluation Commission, Festus Mogaya, said after a hastily convened meeting aimed at resolving the dispute that a proposal had been presented to the government and the SPLM in the opposition. JMIC, which includes Western powers, African representatives and others, had proposed allowing Machar to bring 195 members of his forces, part of a quarter agreed in a peace deal, and a limited amount of arms. The two South Sudan rivals have strained the patience of international mediators, frustrated by continued wrangling after the peace deal was signed in August to end more than 2 years of fighting in a nation that gained independence in the year 2011. Machar, who will be the first vice president in a transitional government with President Salva Kiir, was due to fly back early this week. All right, and as I had earlier mentioned, tonight we are putting into perspective the issue in South Sudan, the standoff between rebel leader Riek Machar and President Salva Kiir. But let us just take a look at the South Sudan timeline since they gained full independence from Sudan and what has been happening in the country. 2011 in January, South Sudanese people voted for full independence from Sudan, which of course they gained. And 2 years later, in 2013, July to be precise, President Kiir sacked his deputy Riek Machar and his entire cabinet. Of course, this is where trouble started brewing in paradise, and in 2013 December, civil war erupted as Kiir accused Machar of plotting to overthrow him. This, of course, are accusations that rebel leader Riek Machar and his camp have consequently denied. But the following year, just a month after the civil war erupted, January 2014, we saw a ceasefire agreement was signed but broken several times. They did not sign a ceasefire agreement once or twice, but several times. And in 2014, in January, still in the same month, Machar was charged with treason, definitely making the situation worse than it already was in South Sudan. Between the 2014 January and 2015 August, when they signed the final peace agreement, President Salva Kiir and the rebel leader Riek Machar signed a total of about 7 agreements, including ceasefire agreements and, of course, peace deals, the roadmap to national unity government and peace deals. 2014 August, we see Kiir and Machar sign the roadmap to peace. And in 2016 February, Kiir reappoints Machar as vice president of South Sudan. Of course, after firing him and the entire cabinet about a year or so earlier, in 2016 February, we saw Machar accept the reappointment as a vice president and finally announced that he would be returning home to finally form a transition government or a government of national unity with President Salva Kiir. Since February 2016, the people of South Sudan have been awaiting the return of rebel leader Riek Machar, or vice president designate, and in April 2016, where we are now, Machar was expected to return home and form a transitional government. Here is where we are now, and this will be the basis of our discussion. February, Riek Machar announced that he will be returning home in April. There was a grand preparations expecting him home. The people of South Sudan, the African continent, the whole world at large is literally holding their breath, waiting for Machar to go home and finally give hope that peace will finally prevail in South Sudan. Of course, a roadmap to a government of national unity, but it seems like it's not the case because Machar is yet to make it to Juba. So joining me tonight to put all this into perspective is Ambassador Jimmy Makach, who is in charge of affairs in the South Sudan Embassy in Kenya. And of course, we have John Gashie, who is a media and a policy analyst, just to help us understand the issues surrounding South Sudan, the truth, the half-truths, and whatnot. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining me tonight.
Thank you.
I will start with you, Ambassador. Just paint for us a picture. What is the situation in South Sudan? What are the issues surrounding the wrangles between Kiir and Machar?
Thank you very much for having me. As I would like to brief the public that we have a good news as of today. We understand that Dr. Riek Machar, after all the change of hearts, that he will be coming back home tomorrow. As you are aware, on the 12th, Dr. Riek Machar was supposed to be in Juba in order to facilitate the formation of the government of national unity. Unfortunately, he wrote to the JAMAC, which is a joint monitoring and evaluation commission responsible for the implementation of the peace agreement, that he will not be in Juba until the 18th,
Right.
which was agreed by the government and by the international partners, signatories to the peace agreement. On the 18th, we were expecting Machar to be in Juba. Unfortunately, he changed his heart again, and he says he will be there on the 19th. Again, on the 19th, Machar did not show up in Juba. As a result, I think the international community, the government of South Sudan, we failed to understand the intention of Machar, because all of a sudden he decided to bring up new demands that if this is not met by the government, Machar will not show up in Juba.
Now, Ambassador, the government released a statement about 2 days ago, of course, talking about these demands that you've just mentioned, new demands that Machar had come up with. But in argument, the Machar camp is claiming that the government is intentionally delaying his return. What is your sentiments about that?
Not exactly. You see, the situation is very clear. The peace agreement is very clear. Machar has already transported 1,370. Machar is supposed to come back to Juba with 1,400. Okay, already we are expecting him to come with 40. But we have compromised. The JAMAC have said very clearly that the government and the rebel need to compromise. As a result, we have accepted the new demands that Machar have done. Machar want to come in with laser missiles and anti-tanks. This is completely not a sign of peace. And we have voiced this opinion to the JAMAC that is implementing the peace. And we are concerned, why would Machar want to come in with such arsenal weapons if he's really coming for the peace? However, the new compromise proposal by the JAMAC is accepted by the government. We are willing to go forward with the implementation of the agreement. Tomorrow, we expect Machar to be in Juba, because we have agreed to Machar to bring in 20 RPGs. We have agreed for Machar to bring in 20 PKM to the country. We hope it is not for bad intention. We want peace, as he said, and we should implement the peace and rescue the situation of our people.
Right. John Gashie, you are an expert and a specialist when it comes to policy making and, of course, the media. When these two leaders are wrangling and each is maintaining their goalpost, trying to push it even further, what happens to the about 11 million people of South Sudan? Who speaks for them?
Thank you very much. That's a very good question, and I think it's indicative of how difficult the peace process will be, in that both parties will try to use each and every opportunity to buttress their position, take advantage of. But perhaps specifically in this particular case, the issue of trying to push the envelope, or rather shall I say, to renegotiate an agreement that had already been set with certain timelines, certain protocols, certain articles that were very clear vis-a-vis what the forces that RIAC would bring into Juba, what their composition would be, their numbers, and what their, arsenal composition would be. Now, the issue that we've seen right now is perhaps trying to rechange the order. Now, perhaps for those with a security military background will tell you, every force has what we call organic weapons and non-organic weapons.
Right.
And at this particular moment, what you're finding is that somebody is trying to renegotiate and to seek to take advantage because of what is happening. Now, as you rightly asked, the people of South Sudan are really anxious. Believe you me, they are extremely anxious, and they're looking forward to a peaceful end to what is going on. Perhaps is what pressure can be brought to bear on both parties to deliver on the key thing, peace for South Sudan soonest.
So who speaks for them? It's almost like both leaders are at this point not quite interested with the people. Let's first deal with this agreement and the outcome and the timelines. Then maybe later we can think about the citizens. Where's the place of the citizen in the whole of this agreement?
Well, it's very difficult right now to identify that, but perhaps the civil society, the faith-based organization, and the ordinary people on the ground. If you ask them what is it that they want, they will tell you, we want peace yesterday, we want peace 3 years ago, we want peace 10 years earlier. But perhaps here there is another underlying issue that needs to be addressed. From where I stand, is perhaps what are the interests at play right now. There is, in my view, perhaps a narrative that is going on that perhaps the return of Dr. Riek Machar will be perhaps in itself be a magic wand to end the war in South Sudan. Far from it. It's just the beginning. The key person, in my view, and perhaps hasn't gotten as much credit, is the president, despite what people might hold against him, his leadership and what have you. He has been, in my view, and he will still be the key person to perhaps more than Riek Machar himself to deliver peace. But the narrative that is going on that is only Riek. Riek is a key player, certainly, and he has a vital role to play. But it must be acknowledged that it's a partnership. And the preferences, perhaps, ideologically, or so to speak, must be put at the level. The people of South Sudan want peace. It's
Right.
not rather whether it's Riek or President Salva Kiir, is that they want peace
At the end of the day.
at the end of the day.
Right, Ambassador Makwach, beginning of this week, we were assured that Riek Machar would jet into Juba. There was a lot of preparations, a lot of anxiety, enthusiasm, not only from the people of South Sudan, the East African community as well, which you are the newest members, of course, and of course the international community as well. You have assured that Machar will be jetting in tomorrow. What happens if he does not? What happens if he pulls a fast one again, like what he did beginning of this week?
Well, it's very unfortunate that the man keep on changing his schedule all the time. But as I said, the peace agreement is signed. It has to be implemented the way it is signed. Machar has to report to Juba. Failure to do so, I think the international community and the region has to hold Machar responsible for the failure of peace in South Sudan. Because simply we cannot have one individual holding the whole country hostage for his own one position, okay, that he has to be sworn in as a vice president. You have seen the circles of what Machar have done. One, he wants to be sworn in on arrival. You don't tell the government that I decide when I come, okay? Which we also compromise. We say will be sworn in on the arrival. He also said he want to come in with his chief of general staff. We said come in with him. We have done everything possible as a government. And as you were asking, who will speak for the civilian and the South Sudanese? It is a government. It is our priority as a government to protect the citizens of South Sudan and their properties. When Machar comes in with all these demands, we also put in the consideration of our people, the population on the ground. So we are waiting for Machar, and we are for peace. Our president have gone beyond the call of duty to disagree with Machar, and Machar went to the bush, waged a war against the government, and still the president appointed him as the first vice president. This is a gesture that shows Machar that the president is for peace. And the people of South Sudan are looking for peace. Machar should just come back to Juba, and we expect him to come to Juba tomorrow.
But he keeps changing schedules and coming up with new demands, and each leader is seen to be holding their stand. Does it boil down to the mistrust between these two leaders?
I think the government is very clear. The mistrust, we are not too concerned about that. I think we have compromised enough to say we will mistrust each other. The thing is, when somebody wants to change the course of the agreement, as John said, there must be a consequences of that. Machar must be held responsible.
Right.
And somebody must take the accountability of why you keep on changing the whole schedule of the international community, the whole schedule of the region when the region is urging you to report to Juba, and address the current issue that we have.
All right, as we wind up, John Gashie, in the event that Salva Kiir and rebel leader Riek Machar fail to agree on a way forward, what are the other options the people of South Sudan could explore to ensure that peace prevails in that young country?
My God, I hope that really does not happen, and I pray, and I think the people of South Sudan really, really would pray. But perhaps to put it in a context, it is going to be a difficult marriage, believe you me. And I think it's going to get perhaps even trickier as the implementation of the peace process continues. But there is an area for me that would be perhaps what we'd call the red line, is when perhaps Riek Machar then perhaps confuses his position as the first vice president with being co-president. There is a world of difference between being the first vice president and co-president. And I think the way we are seeing the peace process, perhaps the way it is being rolled out, and perhaps the narrative that is being given, is that then they are equal. They are not. Are they co-principals? Yes. Are they beholden to the peace process? Yes. But that must be understood. And perhaps what you're saying now, assuming, and I'm hoping and I pray that this does not come to pass, is that the people of South Sudan and the people of East Africa and the international community cannot allow, and I perhaps say this, cannot allow South Sudan to fail, because if it were to fail, the ramifications, the implications are immediate. Immediate in Kenya, immediate in Ethiopia.
Spillover effects to the
spillover effect, and perhaps you have to understand the context. South Sudan has at least one of the largest unaccounted and collected small arms. You're talking about in excess of, God knows, possibly 5 million. And you're talking about a country that has been at war for nearly 40 years. And so I'm just trying to tell you that the world cannot afford a South Sudan that fails, and specifically for us in Kenya and in the region.
Yes, yes.
We cannot afford it.
They were just admitted to the East African community the other day as well, so it is our responsibility as well. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming in. Jimmy Deng Makwach, Ambassador Jimmy Deng Makwach, in charge of the affairs in the South Sudan Embassy in the country. Thank you very much for coming in. And of course, John Gashie, media and a policy specialist, very, very knowledgeable about matters to do with the South Sudan. Of course, saying the people of South Sudan cannot afford another war, as coming out loud and clear from this discussion. But let's